today with something you've probably scrolled past more times than you can count. It is a diagram, and just stay with me. You'll know where I'm going in a second. This diagram is usually on a white background, clean lines. There's usually three neat little boxes. One box will be at the top of this pyramid diagram, and it is going to say holding company. Then on the bottom left, it is going to say operating company, and the bottom right is going to say assets company. For example, it might be a carousel, same theme. Holding company, operating company, asset company. And the caption underneath this diagram, reel, carousel, whatever it is always going to read something like this. This is how the 1% protects their wealth, or something of that nature. It looks simple, it looks elegant, it's almost comforting in a way, right? Like once you draw the boxes, the danger just magically stays outside the lines. But here's the truth no one tells you in a 30-second reel. That diagram is neat, right? You've seen your favorite influencer maybe draw it on a whiteboard. It looks really pretty on that carousel or slide or reel, but that diagram is not protection. It's just a map. And we know what maps are, right? A map is not the territory. Oh, what am I trying to say here? If you build that structure without understanding the rules that govern it, you have not built a fortress for your finances, for your assets. What you've actually built is a target. And here's why. Structure without discipline is just a paper trail, and paper trails are what lawyers like to follow. I should know. I'm a lawyer. My name is Patience Babajide McCormick, and this is the sidebar. So, we are officially in 2026, and the legal environment business owners are operating in today is not the environment that produced those diagrams in the first place. So there was a time and a space where these diagrams were true, were real, helped business owners, made a ton of sense. The old playbook assumed a couple of things. The first thing is that ownership could remain invisible. And the second thing was that the courts would respect form over behavior. So they would respect what you've put in place over how you actually act around what you've put in place. Both of those assumptions are now completely dead. Today, we're going to peel back the onion and peel back this diagram layer by layer, not from an Instagram perspective. So there's not going to be any gotcha moments, comments, success for more information, none of that. We're just going to give it to you courtroom style, maybe. I'm going to explain why most of these structures collapse under litigation, why anonymous LLCs are largely a myth, and why the real advantage the wealthy use has nothing to do with secrecy. And then after we've covered that, we'll talk about what I call the 50-cent strategy. See, I had a lot of fun putting this episode together because 50 Cent is pretty great, right? He's really petty, but I think if you actually did some research on him as a business person, you would be quite impressed. And we're not covering him because he's a celebrity. We're covering him because he understood something that most businesses and most business owners never understand. And that little fact is that you don't win by hiding. You win by becoming uncollectible. So when you see those diagrams, what the person posting those diagrams is trying to explain to you or wanting you to do is put this setup in place with your holding company sort of hiding things, right? Hiding what your operating company, your asset company is doing. You don't need to do that. You don't win by doing that. That's just, I don't even know what I want to call that right now. Chaos, I guess. It's chaos. But you win by being uncollectible, having your assets set up in such a way that creditors, the bank, opposing counsel, a judge cannot render a verdict where all of that is gone with the wind. So let's talk about the biggest structural shift in the US business law in a generation. It is the Corporate Transparency Act. This was in about 2024 where we started talking about this. It's been a lot of confusion since the act first, came out, but you've probably heard it called the CTA. Most people treat it like background noise. They're going to ignore it. They don't want to think about it. That's a wrong move. And a lot of people are just scared by it. That's also the wrong move because it's actually not that scary. I think I've actually done an episode on this previously. I may have done it on TikTok. I don't know where I put it, but I have definitely talked about this topic before. Either way, both perspectives are a mistake. See, for decades, forming an LLC in places like Delaware or Wyoming or Nevada, it came with a quiet perk. That perk was anonymity. You could file the paperwork, you could pay the fee, then you'd list a registered agent, and on paper, no one could tell who actually owned the company. That anonymity wasn't just convenient, it was strategic. It was, pretty great, actually. But as you can imagine, it was used for good and for bad, for nefarious reasons, for hiding transactions that were quite frankly illegal. But what it did do from a strategic perspective is that it slowed down plaintiffs. It discouraged fishing expeditions, who has the deepest pockets. It created friction, and that's the biggest deal because friction is protection. The federal government decided they were done with that system when they created the Corporate Transparency Act. So, starting in 2024 and fully operational through 2025, the Treasury Department, through a bureau called FinCEN, launched this national ownership database. And here's what all of that means in just plain English. My forte really is breaking down really complex legal topics into easily digestible conversation pieces. So I hope that when I explain this to you, you'll be able to just have regular conversation with the people around you and, each one teach one. Okay. So if you own 25% or more of a company, or you exercise substantial control over it, so the day-to-day business operations, you are substantially in control of that, you are now considered a beneficial owner. And FinCEN then requires, if you are this beneficial owner, they require you to provide your legal name, your home address, your date of birth, a government issued identification. Basically, they want to know who you are as a person, where you live, your legal identity. But before you start, dreaming up things and your imagination starts running and who's going to have access to this information is not public record. It is not public. It is accessible to federal agencies and increasingly to law enforcement and to regulators, but it is not public record. It is, however, mandatory. You got to do it. If someone has told you you don't have to do it, you have to do it. I've had to do it. The clients have had to do it. You got to do it. And if you miss the filing deadline, here's what you're looking at. Fines of up to $500 per day per violation. If you have multiple businesses, if you're missing the filing deadline by weeks and months, yeah, that adds up very quickly. It's not a slap on the wrist. That's a bleed. That's a bleed to your business that is income and assets and finances that you don't need to lose. That's just going out the window. So why does this matter for your 3-box diagram? Because the invisibility cloak is gone now. It matters. See, in 2026, this year, as we begin, if a creditor wants to know who controls the holding company, for example, or the asset company, or the operating company, the trail is no longer a maze. It's a straight line that leads to you. And once identity is known, behavior becomes the battlefield. Not your behavior in terms of, like how do you behave, but behavior in terms of how do you operate each of these businesses. Which brings us to the doctrine that kills more LLCs than bad contracts ever will. In the eyes of the law, your LLC is a completely separate person from you. You are you. Your LLC is a completely separate person, an entity. This isn't poetry. It's just doctrine. It's just the law. It's how things go. And it works for your benefit. It's actually really great that this happens this way. This LLC has its own rights, separate from your rights as an individual. It has its own obligation, separate from your own obligation, and it has its own money, which is very much separate from your money and needs to be that way. That separation is conditional, though. The only way that we'll look at this two things as two separate entities is conditional. It exists only for as long as you respect the separateness. And this is where we talk about the alter ego doctrine. The alter ego doctrine is how lawsuits jump the fence. They don't have to walk through the door, they just jump the fence and they're there. Let me give you a scenario because I think that'll make it much easier to understand exactly what this means. So, let's say you're out to lunch with a client, right? We have those lunches. The bill comes and it's your client. So, of course, you're going to pay. It's only 50 bucks. I don't know. Maybe you're at, I was going to say Sweet Green, but I don't think your bill for two people would come up to 50 bucks at Sweet Green. It's pretty pricey. Wherever you're at, it's 50 bucks. You open up your wallet, you grab the card that is closest to your fingers as you dabble through your wallet. And that card so happens to be your asset company card, not your operating company card, your asset company card. You think to yourself, it's fine. I'll reimburse it later. It's all my money anyways, right? That's what we're thinking. That's what you're thinking. I'll clean it up in QuickBooks at some point in time. It'll be fine. Yeah, you may do that with your personal account. I know for me and my family, we have a bills account, a date night account, expense account. And sometimes we might dip into that bills account a little bit because we always have extra there for date night because we be going out. But that's our personal stuff, right? That's not our business. That's not how you operate a business. In your mind, it sounds like it's nothing because that's how you probably operate your personal accounts. But in a courtroom, that receipt is Exhibit A because that's called commingling. Commingling might be fine for your personal finances. It is not fine when you're crossing from personal finances into business finances or when you're crossing among your different businesses and their finances. Commingling is the fastest way to tell a judge that this company isn't real and it's just you in costume, essentially. And the opposing counsel, when they see this, they'll argue that you didn't respect the corporate separateness. You treated company funds as a personal fund. The entity only exists solely for your convenience and nothing more and nothing less. And then they'll ask the court to do something called piercing the corporate veil. Because if you don't respect the separateness and the benefits that come from that separateness, why should the court? And so they poke a hole in that protection and it just evaporates. Now, if the judge agrees with the opposing counsel's argument, those three neat little boxes, your holding company, your operating company, your asset company, those three little boxes, they just collapse. The lawsuit against your business becomes a lawsuit against your home, against your car, against your personal savings, you name it, against your future income, even. It becomes a lawsuit against you. And here's the part that no one likes to hear. And I hate being the bearer of bad news, but I think I'm going to have to be the one who is pulling back on these myths that are being told on social media for clicks and views. See, most business owners don't lose because they picked the wrong structure. I get clients asking me all the time, should I be a sole proprietorship? Is it an LLP? Is it an LLC? You don't lose because you picked the wrong structure. You lose because you don't maintain the right behavior. You don't have an operating agreement. You don't have any minutes. You have no resolutions. You have shared bank accounts. Your personal expenses are everywhere on your personal accounts, on your business accounts. You have no structure in place. And even when you do have structure, you have no discipline. So you're just kind of bouncing all over the place. Because structure without discipline is not protection. It ends up just being evidence. So you might as well have no structure. You might as well not have these businesses in place if you just don't want to be disciplined in how you're supposed to operate them. Because it turns out to be evidence against you. And why create the evidence that will be held up against you? So I guess what I'm preaching is have more discipline. If you're going to have the structure, have discipline. So let's talk about 50 Cent for a little bit because he is actually someone who did things the right way. Like I said, I think his business savvy is something that ought to be studied. He is very intelligent when it comes to being a business person, very petty, but very intelligent. See, in 2015, headlines exploded. 50 Cent files for bankruptcy. And I'm sure you were one of the people who laughed at that or were like, whoa, really? Not 50? Because this man could talk. In fact, you know why he's on headlines right now because of some of his pettiness or expose, however you want to think about it. But I think when that report came out that he was filing for bankruptcy, we all assumed that he was broke, right? When someone files for bankruptcy, that's typically the assumption. Well, in 50's case, he wasn't. And in many cases, that's not the case. What he was facing was over $20 million in judgments. And here's where the lesson lives, the lesson around discipline. See, 50 didn't operate as just one giant sloppy entity. He put the structure in place. He siloed his businesses. He had them as separate entities so that company A, company B, company C. He used that rule and did exactly just that. So his brand income, it was separate. It lived in its own company bucket. His intellectual property, that lived in its own bucket as well. His real estate was separate, lived in its own bucket, and so on and so forth. Each company had its own accounts, no commingling, right? Had its own records, had its own operating schema, had its own purpose. Each company not only had structure in place, but also had all of the details to back that structure. So when creditors came knocking, they couldn't just sweep the table and have full on access to all of his assets. He filed Chapter 11 not because he was out of money, but because he was strategic. They could only access a certain portion of his assets. See, bankruptcy forced negotiations. It slowed the clock. It created friction, right? It created leverage. And that friction and that leverage is really what led to the creditors realizing that they couldn't easily collect. And when you can't easily collect, when you're hitting that friction, settlement becomes the cheaper option. He was smart. That was really smart. That was really strategic. Whoever he has on his corner, keep paying them those big bucks. It wasn't secrecy that helped him to win here. It wasn't vibes that helped him to win here. It wasn't diagrams. It wasn't just putting the structure in place. It was a discipline that he also had to ensure that he kept these entities separate. It was the rules that he had in place. It was the leverage that he then created as a result. All right, so I'm going to wrap things up. Here's the takeaway. I want you to stop taking legal advice from people who sell diagrams but don't sit for depositions, people who are sharing these diagrams on social media for likes and views because this is the way they make money. Stop taking that legal advice. Stop taking that finance guru advice. Rule protection is not flashy, right? It probably looks a little bit like this. It doesn't have background music, no flashing lights, it doesn't have the latest, greatest influencer sharing something with a really pretty background. A lot of times it's boring. Real protection is a little bit boring. It's disciplined, it's consistent, it's detailed, it has a plan. To help my clients, I have this legacy asset checklist. It's on my website. It's the same ones that I use to test whether prevail for my client is thin or solid. Like I said, again, it is on my website. It's lawrooted.com. I want you to go on there. I want you on the homepage to select get freebies. I believe it is. Click on that. Get your freebies. There's tons of information on there. It's free. Use it, right? Find out whether there are leaks and loopholes or things that you haven't accomplished and fix them, address them, I want you to win. I want you to grow. I want you to succeed. I want us all to win in 2026. Get your execution plan together. I'm Patience Badgett McCormick. This is the sidebar. We don't just practice law here. We build fortresses for our clients. Although you are not my clients because there is no attorney-client relationship formed between us, but I want to help you build your fortress. So I want you to subscribe. I want you to go online. I want you to check out all the freebies. And I will see you in the next sidebar. Until next time, we're out.